Concord is dead. No, this isn't an exaggeration. This has to be a new world record. Summoning Salt is going to have to make a video on this. The game is fundamentally unplayable. And of course, journalists are coming out to try and defend it, to try and say that actually everything is okay. And some of them are trying to create a different narrative. They're trying to spin this in a different direction, including directions that make it out to be like, oh no, gamers are bad, gamers so mean, gamers treat the game badly. And I really need to talk about some of this stuff, and that's what this video is. So let's start with how this game is gone. Concord peaked on Steam yesterday with 190 players, and it's currently sitting at 71. So think about that. Right now, if we take away PlayStation from the equation, which can happen because they can turn crossplay off, which, by the way, in case, a PlayStation fanboy comes along and tells me that, but it's a PlayStation game. No, in the case of something like Helldivers 2, we already saw that about half the players are on PC. PC is a very important player in the space, and it is really important to PlayStation's strategy, okay? So if we take PlayStation out of the equation, there can be 7 matches of Concord in existence. Think about that. That's insane. 7 matches. That's all there can be. And I say can because this is worldwide, or at least in the territories where PlayStation Network operates. So this negative trend has reached the point where it's very likely that when you take into account the geography of things, where these 71 players are across the world, that if there are 7 matches of Concord happening right now, the quality of them is terrible. It's full of ping, lag, it's just an insufferable mess. Of course, forget about skill. If for some reason, one of the greatest gamers on the planet is playing, and Joe Schmo is as well, he's going to get stomped, and probably stomped over and over and over again because there's only 71 people playing. And please, let's spare a thought for that one person who's getting left out. Now look, player counts aren't everything for video games. I especially think that in the case of single-player games, there are a ton of situations where great games have had very low player counts, they're not discovered, and very often we'll see them reach new player counts even years later as more and more people discover them and recommend them, and also they just kind of exist out of time. People play them, they put them down, so every new player that comes in spends their 20 hours and leaves or whatever. In a multiplayer game, your player count, especially at launch, is incredibly important because it's not just if it's popular, we're going to get into that in a minute. It's about the experience of being able to play the game. If there's nobody playing the game, I can't matchmake. I can't get into decent matches with low ping and good opponents. And instead, it's just a miserable experience. And of course, low player numbers, feed into it of I'm never going to pick up a game like this. I'm never going to start playing Concord if I know that I'm never going to get into a match. There is potentially more entertainment in taking $40 and burning them. But this isn't just the case on PC. It seems to be that PC is doing worse than PlayStation, but PlayStation is doing terribly as well, as we can see from this article by Push Square, which says, players complain of lengthy PS5 matchmaking times as Concord numbers dwindle. And this article links to one of the problematic articles that I mentioned before. We're going to dig into that in just a second. But when I say that in a practical sense, Concord is dead, I'm being serious. It's a game that just came out, that had an 8-year development time, that had a huge $200 million budget sunk into it, that just days after it's released, it is unplayable. You cannot play the game in a good condition anymore, and this is only going to get theoretically worse. I can't imagine how it's going to be worse, but it's going to. In the next week, there will be a single match of Concord ever functioning on the planet. This isn't just the biggest live service flop anymore. This is the biggest video game failure of all time. And I do not know what plans Sony has to try and keep this ship afloat, but they better start implementing it tomorrow. Tomorrow. Because otherwise, I don't think there's ever a chance of this ever even being playable anymore. Now, this, of course, has not stopped people from being PlayStation defenders, I guess. Concord aside, PlayStation is having a great year. All signs point toward the hero shooter being a colossal flop. But PlayStation is doing fine, guys. Helldivers is in this magnificent, healthy state that everybody loves, and Astrobot is coming out, which, by the way, the Astrobot does look fun. I'm not going to take that away from it, and I hope it's a great game and it does well. But to say that PlayStation is having a great year, man, we know what's going on here. We know, Engadget, please stop. But the really problematic article, the one that has made me angry, is this one by Tyler Wilde, which is the editor-in-chief, this is very important, this will matter in just a bit, of PC Gamer, which is titled, "The Eagerness to grave dance on unpopular games has become a bad habit." Now, the reason I say that editor-in-chief matters is because an editor-in-chief, it's their job to guide the overall content of the publication to make sure that it fits a consistent voice, and of course, to approve or not the articles that go up. So this is the same person that approved in October of last year an article that said more people are playing Arcane's Prey than Redfall on Steam right now. This wasn't written by Tyler, but he had to approve it as editor-in-chief. And this is, of course, an article completely dooming and grave dancing on Redfall by saying that the studio's previous game, Prey 2017, had more players than Redfall. So I guess grave dancing is really bad unless you're using it as a vehicle to say, ooh, the games I like are good and this live service game that I don't like is bad. Just to provide some context, just to make sure that's there before we start talking about this article. Now, generally speaking, what the writer goes into here is the idea that people are celebrating. People are happy that Concord sucks, that it hasn't had success. Now, let me stop you right there for a second, because having a ton of people say that this game looks mid, that the characters are ugly and unappealing, that they don't see the point in it, that its marketing was not good at all, and it actually made a lot of people not pay attention to the game, and then seeing that investment in it. It doesn't matter from which angle you're looking at it, from a wasted opportunity, a waste of money, or just flooding the space with things that nobody wants and nobody asked for, and then having gamers be happy that it failed, is because they get to say, I told you so, and because it's a valuable lesson for the industry. It's not that deep, my guy. But on top of that, this article reeks of saying that people who have issues with a game don't deserve to voice their opinions, that their opinions are less than, when consumers, and we should never forget this, are the ones who hold the power, because they're the ones who hold the money. They're the ones who say what they want and what they don't want. And when they stand up and say, we don't want this, that matters. And yes, I could highlight that PC Gamer did jump on the hating Black Myth Wukong and interrogating their developers and going along with allegations to try and sabotage game science, but I already talked about that in my Black Myth Wukong video, but it's worth remembering. And then he continues to talk about a lot of things that I think paint gamers and the community in a very negative light, and fails to understand so many things in a way that almost feels like they are trying to deceive us and paint a different picture. And if you guys know the channel, I'm going to be fair. There's like 2 points here that I agree with that I think are well said, nothing new, but are correct in the assessment. But that's 2 of like 10 points. So he says that the jubilation over Concord's low turnout derives to some degree from an I told you so sense of justice, the idea that out-of-touch, creatively bankrupt executives are cynically chasing trends, and the rest of us would have had the common sense to avoid releasing a Concord or a Marvel's Avengers, a Slip and Slide Squad, a Gotham Knights, or that perplexing Gollum game. Which, let me just tell you, yes, we would have. Because they say here, but it's not actually that easy to know why one game succeeds and another doesn't. But it is. All of these games share common elements. For starters, they're between mid and not good. Like, let's just start there, right? 4 of these 5 are also technically live services, which we've said it a million times. Very competitive market, very difficult to break into, very difficult to steal players away from whatever game they're already invested in, and something that a lot of people are just shying away from. We don't want to be locked into this live service scheme. We don't want to commit to it. Concord, we've already covered like why it's a disaster in many different ways, but Marvel's Avengers looked terrible from the start. And it looked like a live service that didn't really fulfill the fantasy of Marvel's Avengers, and when people played it, they said it wasn't very good. Slip and Slide Squad came from a very reputable developer that people wanted to do something. They did something completely different that had all the hallmarks of things that people precisely didn't want, that seemed to ignore everything that the studio was previously good at, and created this weird open world looter shooter That then on top of that, when people played it, they said that it wasn't really anything of note, which you need to be to break into that space. And even then, Slip and Slide Squad is not the failure that Concord is. It's a huge failure. Before this, Slip and Slide Squad was like, damn, well, I don't think we've ever seen a failure this big. This game is only going to make back like 20% of its budget or something. But, you know, Concord said, hold my beer. Gotham Knights, very similarly, just looked terrible from the start, and it looked like we have Batman Arkham at home. You know, when your game launches and people are comparing it to a game from 2013 or comparing it to a game from 2015, like the Arkham City and the Arkham Knight games, that they look considerably better, that they play better, that all of these things, do you really expect that you're going to sell your now looter-infused game? And Gollum, like, let's not start with Gollum. Gollum already has, like, we know what happened with Gollum, and it's sad. People tried, things were mismanaged, budgets were misplaced, and at the end of the day, the game is what it is. But like, don't throw Gollum or Rise of Kong into this conversation. Like, it's the odd duck out, we clearly see it. But it is actually easy to see when a project is misguided, when it's chasing trends, when it's trying to fit into a market, when it's trying to take a slice out of a big pie without having the chops or the creativity or the personality to do that. And let's go down here to where he says, if you release an unpopular game, everyone is suddenly morally justified to shame and embarrass you. Just going to leave this up on the screen for like 2 seconds more. All right, let's go back. Whether it's because all big budget games are bad or live service games are bad, or you did too much woke, pick one. And I just want to quickly say, all three of these are possible. You can do all three at the same time. But this is, again, a very gross mischaracterization of things and of the perception of gamers. Not all big budget games are bad. That is not the case at all. Many big budget games are very much beloved. There just seems to be a trend of games that have smaller budgets and therefore require passion instead of just consultants to reach a certain level of quality that tend to be better experiences for players or are trying to innovate and break into the space in a smarter way. The idea that all live service games are bad is also not true and not something that many people repeat. Like, there are extreme cases for all of these, right? But live service games can be excellent. And the proof of that is the millions of people who play them every day. It is precisely the fact that people know live service games, have one that they already like, that they and their friends play, that means that they don't want to play other live service games unless they are directly better. Which, in the case of Concord, it's not original, it's not doing anything new, it's very directly competing against other games that are indeed better and more established. It was doomed from the start. But that doesn't mean live service games are bad. Millions and millions of people play them and enjoy them every single day. Quite the contrary, the problem is that the live service games that are either good or have already established themselves are way too good in that market, which is what causes the envy of all of these people who want to be that. And of course, or you did too much woke, pick one. But there is, in many cases, parts of the industry that are pandering towards certain audiences. What you notice is that games have been injected with not genuine, honest representation of things, but with something that feels like a checklist of corporate mandates of we need to have these things in this game, otherwise we're not going to meet our quota for standards. And people don't resonate with that. And you can't just dismiss people's worries on those things or their right to talk about that. All three of these things are equal in the sense that they do matter and that there are people who present extreme views on them, but you can't just bundle them up and pretend that they're all like not important or reduce all of them to nothing. And so this guy just takes a leap of faith and says that I guess the real reason is that gamers feel a victory over FOMO. You could not be more wrong. Now, I'm not claiming to know every single gamer out there, but I think that most gamers want great games to exist. In other words, we want something worth missing out on to exist. Concord is not something worth missing out on, and we're not celebrating that. If it was incredible, if it had everything that it's missing, people would happily pay $40 and play it, and nobody would feel forced into it. Most gamers now are adults. This isn't like little kid stuff anymore. Look at us, man. If it's a really good game that everybody wants to play, we will find the $40 or we'll find it later on. It's fine to play it. And if it's not something that's up our alley, it's not in a genre we enjoy, we will just be happy for the people who get to play it. We'll be like, yeah, man, that's good for you. Enjoy your game and keep playing our SNES RPGs. We celebrate when great games exist. And it's so dumb, truthfully, to present it this way. When Concord launched the same week as Black Myth Wukong, to say you can safely go back to whatever I was playing before without worrying that anyone's having fun without me is insane when we had the biggest launch of the year the same week and everybody was willing to put down the money for that. And we're going to continue with this in just a second. He says, this situation gives way to a shit-talking free-for-all that turns the developers into cartoonish corporate stooges and totally warps the reality of the game. Now, I am the first one that despite all of the things you could say, that the people who worked on it got paid, that the people who worked on it and were competent and did a great job, because there are a lot of very solid technical, like engineering things in Concord, that they're going to find a job no problem, they'll be fine. I still think that there's people who were invested in it and didn't want it to come out this way, and that it was misguided in many key creative ways from the start. And I do personally advocate for empathy for those people who dedicated 8 years of their life to a project just to have it be the greatest disaster in the history of gaming. But you can't tell me there's no corporate stooges involved in this, because how did this ever flop if it wasn't from the leadership perspective and the overall creative vision for the project, huh? But here's the kicker, and an argument that I think is very interesting. I'm not convinced that the price was a problem. Concord couldn't even get a large audience to give it a shot during its free beta. So I already talked about how difficult it is to remove people who are into live services, who are into shooters, who are into hero shooters specifically, from the game that they're already playing, that they're invested in, that they've put in money and time and friendships and a social group around. And let me just say that I think that if Concord were free to play, it would have done better. It would have probably died because the game is mid. It's unremarkable. And if you're going to place your time into a game like this, why not do it with a game that's just better and right next to it and also free? But there's multiple reasons people didn't even try the beta. The biggest exposure that Concord had was its reveal, which was a cinematic reveal that had a lot of people thinking that it was going to be like a cool campaign shooter, a PvE multiplayer game with different heroes or something. And when they went from uninspired cinematic reveal to developers using buzzword salads about how they are revolutionizing the field of hero shooters with their great ideas from 8 years ago, people tuned out. From there, marketing really never ramped up. You can go anywhere online and see people saying, I didn't even know this game was coming out. I didn't even know it existed. And to be fair, if I didn't cover games on the channel, I would have never had continued to follow Concord, a game that from reveal I said was going to fail. So already you needed the stars to align. You needed somebody that was aware of the game, that had heard about it, that knew what it was and was excited about it despite the bait and switch of the reveal that a lot of people felt it was. Then you have to overcome a lot of the noise and negative buzz that was surrounding the game as it not being very remarkable, plus the consistent memes online of the characters are incredibly ugly, which they are. There's nothing that I want to embody here. There's nobody that I want to play as because I don't feel cool with any of them. So they have to get over that as well, over looking at this game and saying, but I don't want to play any of these characters. And then on top of all of this, and this matters a lot, when they go to sign up for the beta, when they go to download the beta for the game tells you before you even start playing it, hey, this game is going to cost $40 in a month. It's going to cost $40. So if you do play this beta and you do somehow, for some reason, enjoy it, you're going to have to spend $40 and convince your friend group to spend $40 on this game and to switch over to it, despite all of this negative attention, despite the fact that nobody knows what this game is, and despite the fact that once you're playing it, is not very good. So I'm just saying, maybe in that case, price was a problem. So let's play the how could have Concord not failed the game? Well, in the most immediate recent events, I think that after the feedback from the beta and after the general reception that people had towards the game, the least they could have done is make it free to play and make a big stink about it. Put a big banner on Steam, Concord out now, free to play, give it a try, make news, make headlines, Concord switches to free to play, heartfelt, comments from the developers saying that they want to keep building the game and to make it the best it can be. They need the feedback from the community to help guide the game in a healthy direction that fulfills what the players want. I know hindsight is 2020, but I said this before all of this went down, so this would have been better. But more importantly, at some point in the 8 years, probably around 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, before they ever put into production any cinematic reveals, somebody at Sony who invested all of this money into this game should have looked at it and said, hey guys, you have some excellent systems here. The characters feel good to move, the shooting is good, the general abilities are fine, but everything else about this game is boring as all hell and does not stand out or really communicate anything to anyone about anything. How about we lose the horrible Guardians of the Galaxy aesthetic and some of these character designs? We can keep the kits, but let's redesign it and we can repurpose them, or depending on when this happens, redo a lot of the visual elements of the game, maybe even the writing, the characters, all sorts of things, redesign the maps so that they have actual personality, and hone down what is the core game mode of the game and where you think the fun of it is, and present that facing forward with a unified marketing push, with a better aesthetic, with a game that feels like it has a real soul, and where you can clearly tell people, this is what this game is, this is how it's meant to be played, this is how we want you to have a good time, hopefully you do. Please come try this game out. It's free. That's what should have happened, because it feels like the most out of touch thing in the world to release the trailers for Concord, to see people react to it and really think that nobody inside the 8-year development time of this game, like they were all so in love with whatever they were doing that they didn't realize that it just doesn't hit anyone for any reason. And now we can say that. Like, we can say that objectively, because it's dead. Nobody likes the way that these characters look. People tolerate them at most. There are core issues with this game, from clarity to game modes to all sorts of things that are not fixed, despite the foundation of the game being sound. It was marketed terribly. It has a $40 price tag. Like, this is the most walking red flag of a game I have ever seen. How did you not know this before revealing it, when there were so many people that immediately upon reveal were like, ooh, this is gonna be bad? And how can there be articles of people trying to look at this from a different perspective, where gamers are bad people for seeing a game that they thought was going to flopping and kind of memeing on it? Of course they were going to meme on it, because we would celebrate if the game were amazing. If this game were amazing, if there were people playing this game and saying it's actually like goated, you have to play this game, you have to come try it, just play it. And people played it and it was amazing. The overall feeling towards the game would turn. Heck, even the incredibly ugly character designs would be overcome eventually. People would get over it if the game were just exceptional. That's what we've seen time and time again. But of course, if you release a game that does nothing and says nothing to anyone, it looks like a trend-chasing game that was probably designed between 5 and 6 years ago, with characters that I don't care about in a hero shooter, with no clear game modes, and that just very obviously doesn't stand out anywhere except like being competent. It's like well made technically. Wow. Like, that's not nothing, but I've said many times, it's better to do something mediocre that has never been done before than to just do the same thing that other people have done better than you already and expect for people to clap. Like, hey, I know there's 50 of these games out there, but I made one too, and it's not the worst. Please clap. And people are celebrating it, because that's a lesson that we would like for developers to learn, to make better games, to hopefully, in a very roundabout way, not make games that fail. So yeah, this is it. Closing the book on Concord, unless there's like huge news or something that like they're going free to play and they're completely changing the game and they've redesigned all the characters or something. Yeah, I want to close this book because there's great games to play. And I never expected it to be this definite. I never expected it to just go down this quickly, but here we are. I've been Mugthief. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I do a lot of things on the channel. The bread and butter is big reviews of both retro games and, new releases. like hour-long analysis and stuff like that. Check those out if you have the time. But I also do news and commentary just like this one. And if that sounds good to you, remember to hit the subscribe button. If you enjoyed the video, remember to hit the like button. And a very special thanks to my patrons up on the $1 patron wall. More info on that in the description below. And as always, I will see you again very soon. Slow fade out.